Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Thursday.
Yeah, same to you.
Thank you. Hello, hi. Oh, look at Neville. Hello, friend. That seems like quite the group behind you. I was like, wow, Neville, that's a lot of people. Hi, Marvin. Good to see you. Wow, look at all these familiar faces. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi, Diane Walker from Notre Dame, right?
Good to see all of you. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. We're so happy to be in this space with you today, Thursday, April 1st. Thank you for taking time out of your day. This is the kickoff of our Inclusive Managers series, which is going to be a monthly free webinar series that just allows us to have space to be able to explore issues that are important, hopefully, to all of us, things that are timely, that are part of kind of the cultural transformations that many of us are going through and helping to navigate, and where we see ourselves as having some responsibilities as allies, as accomplices, as managers, as colleagues, as friends. And also to be able to do some kind of deeper dive and come away hopefully with some practical tools or practical next steps that might be useful for you in your ongoing leadership practice. So this very first one is focused on how it is that we can stand in solidarity with the Asian Pacific Islander community, especially given the very significant rise of hate crimes that is specifically targeting that community. We know that in the last 12 months alone, there's been a 150% increase in hate crimes against people who identify as Asian and Pacific Islander. I've had several conversations just this morning with CEOs of global firms who have talked about employees being attacked walking down the street and how it is that they are trying to position themselves and their workforce to support the very specific needs of their colleagues. And also it's important, while we are supporting the needs of our colleagues who identify as Asian Pacific Islander, those of us who do not identify as such also have tremendous opportunity for finding ways that we can continue to do our own work, continue to show up with and for our Asian Pacific Islander colleagues and friends, and also figure out what it is that we should be doing as far as our own action items. So that's what this space is here today. We look forward to being in a really good conversation with you. With that said, let me take a couple of moments. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Dieta Jones. I am the founder and CEO of Dieta Jones and Associates. We're a consulting firm that specializes in leadership and management and strategy, organizational effectiveness, and we bring an equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism lens through all of those practices, processes, services, systems, and brand that hopefully is in the service of helping our clients really position themselves optimally for the environment that is consistently changing, but also in ways that really reference and reflect their inclusive values. I am joined by an amazing colleague and friend, someone with whom I've worked for many years. Well, not many years, but a good number of years and across a variety of different roles and responsibilities, Molly McInerney. And Molly McInerney is a member of the DJ team, a recent member of the DJ team, which has been just a gift for all of us. Molly is the senior consultant at DJA. She brings more than 10 years of experience across the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors associated with all of her engagements. She's a skilled facilitator, and she's worked closely with senior leaders and employees at all levels on equity-minded strategic planning and implementation. She's known for her passion to build relationships and cultivate communication across organizations. As a champion for inclusive learning experiences and peer education, Molly formerly was a librarian at Harvard Library. Her previous experience includes working at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's library, where she and I met, and where she served in leadership positions for community engagement, professional development and training, as well as diversity and social justice initiatives. Molly was also an Association of Research Libraries Leadership and Career Development Fellow and is an alumna of the Partnership Incorporated's Leadership Development Associates Program. She holds an MS in Library and Information Science from Simmons University and a BA in History from Boston University. And Molly is going to be not just a colleague from DJA, but the guest for this presentation today and this conversation today to bring some hopefully real kind of structured substance to the way that we explore how it is that we can stand in solidarity. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I go any further. Would love for you to, if you haven't yet, make sure that your full name is showing to the extent that you would like for it to show. If you have a name that is often mispronounced, like my own, feel free to use the phonetic pronunciation. If you would like to add your pronouns, as I have done, please go ahead and do that to make sure that we are accurately referencing each other and bringing our full selves forward. This session is being recorded, and it's being recorded very intentionally so that we can reference it again and share it with others. So please note that anything that you say or put into the chat will be shared, and that is the intention. We hope that it's still an open and engaging space, but it is meant to be shared. The video will be uploaded to the Deetta Jones YouTube channel, and we are dropping the YouTube link in the chat, so you'll have easy access to that, and you can again share from there. If possible, absolutely, please be on camera. It's wonderful to have that level of engagement with each other. If it's not possible or desirable at this time, that's absolutely fine as well. Mute your microphone unless you're speaking, but please know that this is meant to be an opportunity for discussion. So if you have something to say and would like to unmute, which you are absolutely welcome and encouraged to do, use the raise your hand function in Zoom to make sure that we can acknowledge you. And again, the instructions for using the raise your hand functions in Zoom are being dropped in the chat, so you have easy access to those. And then anytime throughout the conversation, please go ahead and chat your heart away. Put anything you want into the chat, and we will be paying close attention to it and try to make sure that we get to all the comments there. And then the last thing that I'd like to say is that these sessions are really meant to challenge your assumptions and to invite you to think about your own assumptions. We're not going to use the Inclusive Managers series or this particular session as a way to tell you exactly what all of the bite-sized answers are to complicated issues and problems. But instead, we'd like this to be a place of reflection and also where we push and stretch in order to grow, which is what hopefully we're all here to do. We are not going to regurgitate all of the lists of things as far as resources that are out there and flooding the internet. We want you to absolutely take advantage of those, but this is meant to be somewhat differentiated, hopefully to add a different kind of value. We'd love for you to be curious and be curious during, but also walk away curious. There are a lot of places where we are kind of dip our toe into a topic, but we will not in this period of time have enough time to go deep into all of the different ideas that might surface, but we don't expect that to end your curiosity. Please, if anything, let that be the beginning of a path of curiosity that you follow after this session. And then we really want to leave you with some practical tools and ideas. So we absolutely will get to that point in our conversation today and leave you with some small steps and some potential big steps so that you can continue your work. All right. With that said, I would like to now turn it over to my friend and colleague, Molly. And Molly, thank you again for getting us to this space here today and also for preparing really a meaningful discussion for us. I'll start off by just asking the question that's posed here, and that is, what can I do as a manager or a leader or a colleague or a friend to support my API coworkers and community? Can you help us wrestle with this topic?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Deetta, and thank you for everyone who is here today. It's really heartwarming to see lots of familiar names and faces from my past, so thank you very much. So today we are going to, I want to say, kind of dig under the surface of just recognizing and being aware of maybe concepts or terminologies or things that, you know, have been on the internet for the past few weeks, and to have a conversation about where you are situated, whether in your workplace or in your community. What is your role and your responsibility? And how are you making yourself aware of the current events and issues which are impacting whether, again, maybe your AAPI team members, people who maybe friends, neighbors, loved ones. And then how do you make a difference? So this will be, again, we'll talk about some context setting about how did maybe we get here as far as the rise in anti-Asian racism, the education of what those implications are. Potential harmful stereotypes would be an example. And then, like Dieta had mentioned, we will talk about some what I call small steps, things that you can take immediate action on as an individual or maybe a small group. And then some food for thought for longer term planning of perhaps looking at your workplace and looking at maybe some systems and structures that could be transformed. And then we will be wrapping up our conversation, Dieta and I, talking about solidarity among communities of color. So I'd like to open up this discussion with this quote here from Stephen Yun. And this quote is, "Sometimes I wonder if the Asian American experience is what it's like when you're thinking about everyone else, but nobody else is thinking about you." This was from a recent profile from the New Yorker magazine last month. I have to say, when I read it, it kind of brought a tear to my eye. I think just this the statement about invisibility and being overlooked, again, this is very US centric by US society, is something that you feel. That's the marginalization of not having your voice heard or being seen. But then also the irony of the past year of being very aware that myself and people who look like me are now hyper visible to people who marginalize us. And so wrestling with both of those things at once, like I've said, this comment really was a revelation. These are things that I think, again, we're bringing in all sorts of aspects of, again, being invisible. Is that something that, I don't know, who pushes us here? Is this something active? Is this something passive? But again, I'd say I'd hold on to this. And I also would recommend, again, if you're trying to learn a little bit more about Asian American culture or experiences, that the film that he is starring in right now, Minari, is wonderful, and I highly recommend it. So we will take that idea of invisibility and sort of obedience and quiet, and we'll essentially transition to a quick overview of the model minority myth. This is, I guess, a narrative, a story that was coined back in the mid-1960s to describe the Asian American community. And while some of you could say, you would maybe refer to the aspects that are associated with this myth as being somewhat positive. There's a positive bias there of hardworking, highly educated, high earners. But having that and describing, again, a massive group just as a monolith that has no distinction or diversity really erases the individual experiences of groups who are experiencing discrimination. And it also reinforces this idea of the perpetual foreigner stereotype that many Asian Americans feel, because they are, again, the monolith, they are this one group. We are making a clear division between us and them, and that's a way to categorize folks. So in reality, I will just say that, you know, there's all sorts of dimensions of diversity in the Asian American community. But the one thing that I hear the most is about the economic prosperity of Asian Americans. And I will just say that, yes, there are high earning Asian Americans, these success stories that we read about, but it's also true that income inequality in the US is the greatest among Asians. This is according to the Pew Research Center a couple of years ago. And more recently, and more specifically, Asian American women had the highest rates of unemployment among unemployed women who had been out of work for the past 6 months. And this was just from this winter. So being hit really hard economically, professionally, that's just one thing, again, that does not really, I would say, live in harmony with this idea of this model minority myth. So our next slide is another part to challenge your assumptions or the assumptions about Asian Americans and the racism that they experience. So I don't know if it's quite small. So here's a tweet. I'm going to read this aloud just because it looks a little tiny, the print. But this is from Dr. Subini Anima. She is a professor at Stanford University. And her tweet says, "Racism is not a virus. White supremacy is not a pandemic. Using illness and disability as a metaphor situates white supremacy and racism as passively spreading. These metaphors evade the way white supremacy and racism are purposefully built into structures and strategically enacted." And again, when I had seen this again, I took a screenshot, I saved this, because this is language that I have used. I am sure I have used this metaphor in the past year of equating racism, right? There's an equivalence of racism being a virus. Anti-Asian racism it's the second pandemic, right? Whatever that means. And I'm bringing this to your attention because while, you know, we expect our leaders and managers to, yes, say condemn anti-Asian racism, you know, make a statement, make that known to the people that you work with. We also need to know when our go-to practices and our boilerplate language is not enough or it's problematic. But that's the true question is it's like, how do you get there? How does someone bring that to your attention? How do you, again, make course corrections of saying like, we don't actually know the knowledge. We don't know that this is problematic and we don't know how to fix it for the next time. And, you know, this doesn't require a specialist, hire your own communications consultant. But it is a matter of knowing like, you're honoring that, yes, systemic racism exists, but you're also paying attention to the individual needs and experiences of Asian Americans who say, this doesn't work for me. The way that you describe this, it's harmful to me as a person, and the grief, the anger, and the pain that I'm experiencing in this moment. So again, just sort of just an example of good intentions, sometimes, you know, not landing the way that we want them to, but then again, looking for ways that, how do we make it better? And that there will never be a universal one right way to show support and solidarity with the API community.
Molly, can I just jump in for a moment? Because yesterday you and I talked through this tweet, and I just felt like it was a great example of something that, you know, it's kind of easy for us to look around and have kind of a visceral reaction and say, yes, this sense of urgency, the kind of the overwhelming presence of this hate, that this targeted hate feels like a pandemic. And because we're in a pandemic, it's easy for me to make that analogy. And I feel kind of moved to have powerful language. And so to be able to just use language that's already powerfully kind of present. But then when we were talking about it, it just kind of underscored how important it is for us to always kind of pause and think critically about our own lenses and how it is that language can be interpreted so differently, right? And also sometimes misaligned with what it is that our intentions are really trying to communicate. I think it would be super interesting to get other folks' perspective. If anybody has any other perspective on any of this kind of feeling of trying to wrestle with, like, how do we communicate the urgency and the significance of what's happening while also, you know, and in a timely fashion, while also being really critically aware of the importance of language. If anybody has ideas, suggestions, anything, this was one like this, it came up yesterday and it was just one of those, not just yesterday, obviously, but it's one of those things that we have conversations with leaders about constantly is how is it that we are time sensitive and say something immediately, but also we get it right. And it seems like that is the really hard work right now. And it's not just about what we say, of course, right? But it's also what happens after that. But the words immediately, it's hard to get right. Anyone have any comments or reflections? You don't have to have right answers. There's no, the right answers are not expected.
I'll jump in. This is Ellis. I'm at Indiana University. I think that fear of not, there's this balance you're trying to strike with responding to the urgency, responding to the moment, with the right language. And I think what I've seen happen and what often happens with other managers that I work with is that hesitancy becomes prolonged because you're waiting for the right words to come to you, or you're waiting, to get feedback across your executive team or whatever. And then the moment passes. And so not only have you missed an opportunity in that moment where maybe you would have got it wrong, but maybe you would have got it right. But now whatever you put out feels too late. And whether you get it right or wrong, then is different because the moment has passed. And I think you're exactly right. That's one of the hardest things right now.
Thank you, Erin. Does anyone else have any other comments, anything to share?
Looks like Catherine has her hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So this is something that I don't know how it originally got brought to my attention, the language that we use around a variety of things. But I've always considered myself a very good communicator, and in trying to explain things to people, I find myself using a lot of figures of speech that are oppressive, hurtful, harmful to a variety of different individuals. And so I catch myself. And so my normally, I guess, really consistent stream of communication is often abruptly paused because I'm trying to avoid not using, for instance, I'll give one, the wild, wild west, or crazy. I now try to find a term. My favorite one these days is chaotic, because as far as I'm aware, that doesn't imply any mental health or geographic, indigenous implication. So that's something that I find difficult, but it's really important because your words matter.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Sage. I see your hand up. Sage, do you want to go ahead? I don't know if you're muted.
How about now?
You're good.
Okay. I took off my microphone from my headphones, so I never know what's going to work and what's not. This is actually a really interesting topic. I'm part of the Human Library. I'm a book. I talk about my experiences as someone who's often overlooked. And what I often tell people is, don't let your fear of doing the wrong thing keep you from doing the right thing. Really, the best way to have these conversations is to build an atmosphere of like a safe space where people know that you are curious, that you care. So even if you say something in the wrong way, they still feel comfortable to tell you, like, hey, I get where you're coming from, but I would prefer if you said it this way, or this is why that's problematic.
Super helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Sage. Anyone else?
Oh, it looks like Sue.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Sue.
Thanks for having this session. I definitely hear and relate to the comments about the timing and the fear. And in my institution, in the program that I lead, there's a wide range of awareness and skills, and the fear is a lot about the learning process when people are at different stages of learning, and some people are at a higher stage of learning, and it could have an impact on them when somebody's just realizing something for the first time and it's their experience every day. So I think that's a big part of the fear. And as a leader, trying to kind of bring along the whole group that report to my program and my peers is just an interesting challenge. And And I too, I agree with what everybody's saying, that I don't want to be held back by the fear, but the fear is definitely there.
Yeah. It's one of the things, and Molly, you know this, we talk about it a lot, that it's one of the things that, you know, is the most pervasive conversation and issue, I think, in many of our organizations is, and that is either speaking up and feeling scared, or being kind of given feedback that we didn't get it just right, and then taking that as something that is critical rather than something that is potentially helpful and constructive and helps us grow and kind of nurture a safe space and a reciprocity that we actually look for over time. Or not speaking up and feeling like we're not living in our full values because we are not taking the action that we know in our hearts and in our brains we can and should be taking, but are really worried about how it's going to be perceived. So this fear is it's disproportionately kind of represented right now and in many of the decisions that we're making. So it's just useful to kind of put it out there and then to think about what are some good strategies for navigating through it, but also making sure that we're really showing up in spite of sometimes that fear.
It seems like if we focus on the structural aspects of what we're trying to dismantle, then we could diffuse the taking it personal and making it personal a little bit.
Yeah.
Just all work side by side to a goal that's a thing, and that the leaders are not, by virtue of their position, they do have power, and but they don't represent, they're not the personification of the thing that we're trying to dismantle.
Well, that's another webinar, and you're right. I mean, it's a big one. I mean, it's a big topic, right? And there's a lot there that can and should be unpacked. Absolutely, right? The kind of the definition of structural and behavioral racism and oppression, right? And how the two are interconnected and what the expectations are at both levels. And what that looks like. And also what are we dismantling and what are we building, right? That's the other question too. I mean, that's the other thing is like interrogating and saying this is broken is sometimes a very different act than aspiring and being able to come to a place where we have a very different and a shared understanding of what that aspirational future is, and coming together in a way that allows us to build a strategic path forward is absolutely an opportunity. With that said, I am going to shift. Are there any other hands up? With that said, let me shift forward. And Molly, I know we had a couple of questions here that might be useful to get back to one of the earlier slides. And I think it's an opportunity maybe to like unpack a little bit some of the things that you shared with some of your earlier slides.
Sure. So just this is first question of what evidence of model minority stereotyping shows up in your workplace? And so this could be, I think, a good maybe chat participation exercise. If this is something, you know, over the course of the next few minutes, you have some examples that you want to share. Again, just sort of respecting other people's privacy and identity. I'd love to see examples from your workplace, or maybe these are assumptions that these might be, again, stereotyping. And then the next one is, again, trying to pull in this leader manager responsibility angle here of, if you have someone on your team, in your organization, who reports to you, who is seemingly isn't aware that they perpetuate some stereotypes or other anti-Asian discriminatory practices, or maybe they are, maybe you're not quite sure. I'd love to hear your experiences of how you would approach this person. How do you give this person feedback and let them know that the impact of their behavior?
That second question is a big one. So we know people need a moment to think, but this is a place where literally sharing strategies with each other would be wonderful use of time. Anybody have any great strategies for having conversations with folks? Anyone? Molly, do you have any ideas to get us started?
I would say I do see two hands. I don't know, dear, if you can see them, but I do see Susan and Sam. I wasn't sure who was first, so I'm just going to go with Susan. I hope that's okay. Susan, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. You never know who's going to show up in which order on the screen as opposed to the participants list, and they should. Thank you. It's great to see everyone. I'm in the middle of this right now with an individual who reports to me, and I'm able to, in this particular case, use the opportunity because it's a dual reporting relationship to work with the other supervisor to really talk about the impact and not only the personal impact, certainly, but the organizational impact. And I think that those are ways in that allow you to talk about the behavior, its impact, while elevating it beyond you're doing something wrong. Let's make a correction for all of us. And I think that that's helping us get above some of the difficulty that people have talking in this area.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate you sort of seeing this from approaching from multiple directions, right, of a strategy here. And you're really describing, focusing on that behavior, right? Not trying to, I guess, sort of what my term would be sort of editorialize your perceptions of that impact. So thanks so much for sharing. Sam, if you want to go ahead.
Hi there, thanks, Molly. This is not too far afield from what Susan was offering, but I think that framing it in terms of how someone's discriminatory practices are perceived by you, the individual who's talking to them, instead of sort of presuming to understand how another person is feeling, you can frame it in a slightly different way. And off of what Susan said, this is not about labeling someone as bad, but this is an educational moment and an opportunity to say, I am choosing to assume you didn't mean this in a hurtful way. This is how it could have been experienced by someone else. This is kind of how I heard it. Here are some ways that you can mitigate that. I think takes the sting out of it. People, I'm just going to say it, white people get very defensive very easily, especially when they're feeling like they're called out. So approaching the discussion with that kind of lens, I think, can sometimes be helpful in mitigating some of the prickly aspects.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. It's nice to see you.
I also love the chat is talking about, opportunities for kind of calling in as opposed to calling out people, which is kind of what we're talking about here. Which is, and I don't know if everybody is, familiar with the language of calling in and calling out, but it may be worthwhile if anyone has anything to say about that, to mention a little bit more about what that is. Anyone like to comment on that? No? Okay. So calling in is really an opportunity to pay attention to, and I think we talked about this, just in the last couple of comments, really pay attention to not wanting to discourage the other person from being able and willing to speak up again in the future, right? It's about not necessarily going out of our way to honor the person's privacy, to not make assumptions about the other person's intention, but to still create a space for course correction, right? There would absolutely is important that something be done immediately, that the person understand what the behavior is as it is for being perceived by you and potentially by others, what the potential negative impacts of that behavior are, and also not assume that that person's intentions were dishonorable, and or understanding that sometimes if people are embarrassed, the longer term implications are that they might shut down from in the future trying. And what we really want, I think, is for people to try, for people to be willing to take risks, for people to be willing to speak up. And if people feel like they are being publicly kind of called out or made to feel ashamed, what often happens, because we talk to people every single day about this, is that they just stop speaking up. Their beliefs and their values don't necessarily change, but their willingness to take a risk, their willingness to be vulnerable in a space where their voices really matter and their potential impact really matters is diminished. And so really finding the right way. Now, there are some times when calling out is absolutely appropriate and necessary, but to the extent possible, being able to think about the strategy that's most appropriate and the outcome that you desire with that other person is incredibly important.
I can also mention too. I was going to say that there is also a careful balance of the yes, the situation and also the calling in and letting, I guess, maybe things, putting them to the side and having a separate conversation for calling in. I think of that as perhaps the person who was harmed by that person's behavior or action, to give that other person space in the moment. That is, I'd say, a judgment call, and something that as a manager, you'll want to assess and saying, would this be more effective as a private conversation and not part of a meeting, a team meeting in that situation. But with that said, I do see Catherine need her hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that I recently learned a lot more about the differences between calling out and calling in. I follow Antiracism every day. That's their handle on Instagram. And they have posted some really good diagrams and kind of infographics about how to approach this and when it's important to do calling in versus calling out. So I just wanted to mention that again. It's Antiracism every day. And I found that very useful and clear.
Super helpful. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Molly, should we go forward? Muted.
This had to happen at least once, right, during this webinar? Okay, so let's talk about feedback and listening sessions. So on our next slide here, I'm talking about listening or brave spaces. There are lots of organizations in this moment are saying, what can we do for our employees sort of at large, or maybe specifically our AAPI employees to have a space to come together, share, process what's going on, and perhaps posing some strategies, suggestions for what we as an organization can do to support them. And so that's great. I think that's a wonderful practice, the capacity, the coordination, if it's there to do that. There are some things, though, that I would recommend as a best practice here. One, when you create this space, make it a space and set the purpose and the expectations up front. Of saying that if this is a space where you're coming together to process and to validate each other, that's what it is. It's not necessarily listening so we get specific feedback so we can carry out or meet specific goals, right? That would be number one. Two, if you are in these sessions with the participants, I would say if you are a manager or a leader, or if you're not a part, you just really want to listen and really try to resist trying to problem solve in the moment, right? Hearing, understanding, not sort of trying to fix things. And I think there's probably a natural inherent sense of defensive-ness of, okay, if this isn't working for somebody, I feel responsible. And I'd say hold on to that, harness that feeling for a little while later. And then at the end, just being able to offer support and to be able to commit to actions and resources going forward. And the last part, which is the most critical, is making sure that you communicate the action plan and the outcomes from these sessions back to the people, the original stakeholders who were a part of the sessions, letting them know what will happen. These are practices that, inclusive management practices of, we all ask for feedback, and it's sort of like, well, why isn't this effective? I feel like I'm opening my door to help folks. And the problem is, and for this situation, it could be sort of that solicit and retreat of, yep, let's collect all this information, don't really have a plan and can't really follow up on it. Or two, being very concern focused of, can you just please point out essentially the problems and the issues? And that is important, but that is very different than, I think, listening and validating before trying to jump to, again, a problem solving and a fix it type mode. So our next slide here is, again, small ways that again, you can do your part, what you can do now. So this is something that I've heard from many friends lately of what they would ask people to do in their workplace that seems like very doable, like could be practiced at any point by anyone. It's learning how to pronounce the names of your API coworkers and saying their name correctly. So, this is, I would say, like a very sort of classic example of a microaggression in the workplace, where introductions or people who you've met, or you avoid saying someone's name. And I have to say that the cumulative effect of not either bothering to learn someone's name or messing it up and not caring is a sign of disrespect. And the impact on that person's sense of belonging and worth and confidence in their workplace, I don't know how that's avoidable. I like to imagine that first week on a job, and for many of us, that's and maybe either online or now in person at an office or another place. Your name, you're probably being introduced dozens of times. And if to hear your name 30, 40, 50 times, pronouncing correctly, I have to say it would be a sure sign for me of saying like, okay, like, can I get past this, right? Is this something that I have to compartmentalize to do my job, to try to make relationships? And that's something that's really small that I would say, if you find yourself avoiding names, mispronouncing, I do it all of the time. It takes a lot of humility to ask and repeat and work on it on yourself. But there are a lot of guides online. So I highly recommend the Asian American Journalists Association's pronunciation guide. They have videos and all sorts of manuals so you can practice there. So that's one. The other thing is simply taking interest in Asian and Asian American cultures. Building your own awareness, which will normalize what perhaps you consider foreign or exotic. We heard folks, I was talking to Dieta, I guess yesterday, about, maybe your workplace talking about your college days or experiences. And it's like, oh, I went backpacking through Western Europe, right? Like this is was my vacation, sort of maybe a shared experience. And maybe not hearing, in this case, maybe Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, as a place where people have spent a lot of time from, again, sort of those undergraduate years, and not learning the social cues or the meaning behind, again, maybe just culturally significant events or ceremonies, things like that. And also just, I would say, expanding your sense of what beauty is, what taste is, what preferences are. And that is something, again, you can do on your own time. It just certainly just takes, I think, like intention and being deliberate about making the time to learn. And the last is about just adapting your communication styles and the way you perceive different styles from your own. I have to say, this is something for, I think it gets wrapped up sometimes in, I don't know, I think almost in hiring language with like fit and someone who works well with others or collaboration, and really examining whether, okay, is this something that I culturally maybe need to understand from the other person, and it is not because there's something deficient with the other person. I need to do something to make this work, or we need to actually talk about this and surf this together to be successful. So those are three things, again, free, you can do them on your time, self-paced. The next slide that we have here are what I would, I'm sorry, Dieta, did you want to jump in here?
I only wanted to mention really quickly that there was a question in the chat, and it's I don't know if we'll have time right now, but it may be interesting just to look at. Do you recommend using this for help with names? I'm afraid to click the link. I'm afraid I'm going to mess up with the screen share, but it may be worthwhile for someone, if anybody else has had experience with this, to chime in the chat and give Beth a response. But also thank you, Molly, for giving us a very specific resource. So if anybody else, I just wanted to be able to mention that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and because of time's sake, we're just going to dip our toe here. I'm just going to, again, hopefully intrigue you a bit to think about these questions. Bigger steps in your organization. Think about promotion and advancement pathways for your AAPI colleagues. Can you look at the systems and the process for promotion? Can you look for anti-Asian bias at different points in the process or how decisions are made? Is there also a noticeable leadership ceiling for AAPI employees? what is your representation maybe for your industry, for your geographic area of people in management or senior leader positions? Questions, just again, to think about at a later time. And then this onboarding process. And this to me is tying that whole learning how to pronounce someone's names properly and thinking about your inclusive onboarding experience. Those things go really hand in hand. I will say that, again, something that seemingly is insignificant. I have been now in 2 new workplaces, 2 new work environments, and I've been asked where I'm from, how to say my name, if that's my real name. This happens several times, and these are, again, this is showing how false this is, are at sort of so-called like liberal Northeast institutions and workplaces, right? So this happens all of the time. And if this is happening on your first day, again, I want managers and leaders to understand, like, we can do things, put things in place that, no, yes, it will help potentially your AAPI employees, but it can also help anyone who joins this organization. So just consider that, again, as part of the entire process, and again, where microaggressions may crop up in the process.
Molly, I could just jump in and say, I'm so happy that you mentioned these 2 points, because there's only 2, and I know that we could fill a whole page with smaller fonts about opportunities for having bigger impact. But these are 2 that are very kind of practical and present all the time, right? So things like promotion practices also cascade into thinking about just our managerial practices, right? And we talk to managers and leaders all the time who say, you know, I have a really great group, and there's some people who are really brilliant, but they are quieter, they don't speak up. I think it's because of their cultural identity. And a lot of times what they're talking about is people who are from the AAPI communities, right? And so what does that mean if our lenses are, these folks are quieter, they could be a great leader, but they don't contribute in the same ways that I contribute, right? Then what does that mean as far as how it is that we're developing folks, how we're giving feedback, how we're making space, how it is that we're ranking and rating people when it's time for promotion, for advancement, for positioning, for leadership roles. So all of those kind of are subtle, but very, very present ways in which, you know, we can see the systems stacking up to have bias in them, right? And the systems have bias in them because every point along the way, humans touch systems. So it's not just about building different systems, it's also about making sure that humans who are touching and interacting with our systems are bringing intentionality and the kind of and cultural awareness that's going to allow those systems to be de-biased and act in ways that are really mitigating bias, and then coupling them with tools that can really help to drive this out as well. So I'm so happy that you brought these up. Thank you.
And so, yeah, these are again 2 questions that you might want to take away. How do you stay informed about the workplace issues that are impacting your AAPI coworkers? And sort of my subtext there, I will admit, is besides asking them okay, I'm concerned, I want to learn. If you have friends and you know that's sort of an open door, have the conversation. But I just want to say, if this is not your area of comfort or expertise, just think about how you're going to stay informed and stay connected without relying, again, on those coworkers to tell you. And then what's one commitment or action that you can take to support your AAPI coworkers? And again, this is large, small, but maybe one thing, your intention for perhaps the next week, next month, the next year, for what you can do. So
this might be a cool point to put some ideas in the chat. It would be nice to get some ideas generated so that people can kind of get the juices flowing for themselves. Anybody have any? Anybody want to unmute? Okay, chat it is, but please, this would be a great one. It would be wonderful to be able to have some of these ideas for you to have available to you. Okay, Molly. So this was a place that you and I spent some time having a conversation yesterday as well, like really thinking through, like, how is it that you and I, Molly, could even say, oh, you know what, this is an important topic that we can demonstrate together. And that is kind of in the context of the questions that that we get at DJA all the time, right? So one of the questions, I'll even, just as recently as last week, we were talking with a global manufacturing firm, and they were saying, how is it that we can really develop a meaningful strategy that targets the big issues that are surfacing right now, things that are shifting in the environment that we really need to focus on, as well as keep ourselves kind of building capacities, because we know we're going to have to keep shifting, right? Last week it was Black Lives Matter. This week it's Asian Pacific Islander hate and all of the manifestations that we need to try to interrogate and change. And then we have topic and topic and topic and topic. What do we do? And so for us, it was, at DJ, at least us talking about, that's not really strategic. We of course need to be thinking about kind of bigger picture, where anti-racism and anti-oppression kind of what it is, right? And how do we pursue a shared vision that tampers out racism and oppression where they live, and also allows for that customized response that recognizes the nuances, the cultural nuances and differentiated histories and identities and experiences lived and historically of different groups, and also to know that all of these groups are not monoliths, right? That they're inside of the API community, there's a tremendous amount of diversity as well. So this was an opportunity for us to just kind of also acknowledge that even within a world where there's all these different topics that we're trying to focus on, we also are looking for opportunities to try to stand in solidarity with each other. And one issue does not take precedence over another. Competing oppressions is not the space that we want to be in, but it's instead, how do we create a shared space of solidarity and action that is strategic and in the service of advancing our shared values. What else? What else? Anything else, Molly, about this topic?
I would say that this is a topic that right now, it seems accessible to people in a way that I don't think it has ever been, as far as where it's popping up from. I mean, the traumatic events of, the Atlanta murders and, subsequent, I guess I'd say incidences just the past week. But to me, there's also this entry point of this dialogue, I don't know, say on the internet, about things like representation and solidarity, where, we're in the middle of awards season for films. And anyone who knows me knows that I watch a lot of movies, and I desperately miss the movie-going experience. But you're also seeing, like, again, Black, Asian, other communities of color coming together and saying, like, we don't really seem to get the recognition that our white counterparts or colleagues are receiving, or how decisions are made about criteria of where a film category falls, or how that they're essentially labeled for competition, is something that brings up a lot of shared feelings. So I think of last year's example of Lulu Wang's The Farewell, and it's an Asian American director and it's an Asian American story. And because the film was, I think, more than 51% in Chinese, it was considered a foreign film. And I think those are types of things that, again, even if you're not in the activist space, or you don't know if there's a place for you, I think those are things just like connecting the dots, of digging a little deeper and saying, okay, like, why do people seem so concerned, right? Like, can I do my own investigation to understand what that means? And again, and this is involving, I think, all communities, and not just communities of color.
Yep. Wonderful. Thank you. I also want to point your attention, everybody's attention, to some of the ideas that came up in the chat as well. And some of the specific examples of the things that you can sign up for. Encourage, Catherine says, and thank you, Catherine, for this, encourage family, friends, and coworkers to register for a free training on bystander intervention at Stop AAPI Hate. And so it gives a very specific place that you could go, which also seems like a great gift to be able to share with others who are looking for strategies and looking for real practical guidance. Thank you, Catherine. So we are winding down. This is the official kind of winding down of the first of the Inclusive Managers series. Just to give context about this series and encourage all of you to keep coming back as much as you'd like. We'd love to be with you in this space. The Inclusive Managers series is an extension of the Inclusive Managers Toolkit. The Inclusive Managers Toolkit is a 10-week program that we offer that's really about helping managers at any kind of place along the managerial continuum, from very, very early to executive, to really think about how it is that we understand how management and communication and organizational effectiveness and equity, diversity, and inclusion, anti-racism all connect to each other, and understanding the behavioral and the structural opportunities that we have for impacting change in real practical ways. It's jam-packed with tools, and it's really meant to be a 10-week experience to allow for that knowledge transfer, that ability to, in the context of people, other people who are also managing, to be able to figure out what are some of the key concepts, what are the tools that are already essential for me to have as a manager, and then how is it that equity, diversity, and inclusion plays an essential role in those, not in addition to, but part of, and then how is it that I practice in this safe and shared space with colleagues. So this Inclusive Managers series is an extension of that to make sure that the learning and the shared space is as broadly available as possible, but also to encourage you, if you are interested in diving in a bit more deeply around your own work, that you know that this program is absolutely available. Next month, we are going to be joined by, or not next month, actually, it's at the end of this month, April 29th. We are going to be joined by Holly Brittingham, who is the global lead of organizational learning and development at FCB, which is an advertising firm that is also one of our clients, and where we've developed really amazing relationships over time, because they've been doing such kind of cutting edge work and really made such strong commitments to not just the words, but the actions. And to really ask Holly to help us think through how it is that equity, diversity, and inclusion in an organization, at a global organization, connects with things like organizational development and strategy and professional development. How is it that we really connect the dots between our values and our lived experiences and our practices, policies, services, structures, organizationally speaking? And so the whole conversation with her, I think, is going to be incredibly meaningful and rich. So we invite you to keep coming back month after month. We'd love to continue to be part of this conversation. And if you have ideas about topics that you'd like for us to include into this series, let us know. We would absolutely love to build out a production schedule based on your interest. Okay. And thank you, everyone. As a follow-up to this, we will send a thank you email to everyone who's registered, including the link to the recording, and also absolutely invite you to subsequent offerings. And of course, we would love to continue being part of your learning journey. So reach out to us if there's ever anything that we can do. And thank you again for being in this space with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Molly, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.